Why was everyone staring when she stepped off the transport? Maybe it was the wind, or maybe it was her. The air at Fort Garrick didn't just move, it bit. It stole warmth from the skin and breath from the lungs. The desert stretched in all directions, raw and empty, a place stripped of comfort and noise. Only the wind had a voice here, harsh, unrelenting, the kind that could wear down even the strongest edges. Sergeant Outlived Vance stood in its grip, one hand holding a duffel, the other gripping a hard rifle case that gleamed faintly in the pale sun. She stood still for a moment, scanning the endless horizon, as if measuring what kind of hell she had just walked into. The chatter outside the low-slung admin building faded when she approached. Men lounged against the wall, faces sunburned and cocky, laughter sharp enough to cut through the dry air. When they saw her, that laughter thinned. Their gazes turned cold, not surprised, just unwelcoming. "Well, look what the diversity initiative blew in," one said, voice low but loud enough. The name stitched above his chest read Deckard. His grin was thick with smug amusement. The others chuckled, the sound rolling like distant thunder. Vance didn't look at them. Didn't need to. She just walked on, steady, deliberate, unhurried. The gravel crunched under her boots, and the wind pulled at her sleeve, whispering through the silence she left behind. She had learned long ago that reaction was a kind of surrender. Silence was her armor, and she wore it perfectly. Inside, the air was still but just as sharp. Colonel Marcus Thorne waited behind a metal desk, posture straight as a rifle barrel. He looked like a man who had been born in a regulation manual, pressed, rigid, and carved from the habit of command. His eyes were steel gray, the kind that had seen failure too many times to be patient with it. He didn't smile when she entered, just tapped his screen, scrolling through her file. "Sergeant Outlived Vance," he said, his voice scraping against the quiet. "Quartermaster Corps, some instructor time, not the usual pedigree we see out here." "No, sir," she said, her tone even controlled. He looked up, eyes narrowing slightly. "Out here we deal in results, not resumes. The wind doesn't care about your test scores and the targets don't care about your service record. The men here have earned their place through excellence under fire. You'll meet that standard. No exceptions. No accommodations. Understood?" "Perfectly, sir." The colonel's grunt was the verbal equivalent of a door slamming shut. "You'll be attached to Alpha Squad. Corporal Deckard will show you to the arms room. Be on the range at 1400 for zeroing. Don't be late." Dismissed before she'd even been welcomed. She nodded once, turned, and left the office, another box ticked off in Thorne's long list of irritations. Deckard waited outside, leaning against the wall like the world owed him something. "Colonel's a real sweetheart," he said, walking beside her. "Just wants to make sure you know what you signed up for. Lot of guys would kill for a slot here." The meaning beneath the words was clear. Lot of guys deserve it more than you. She didn't respond. The arms room smelled of gun, oil, and metal, a comforting scent, at least to her. The civilian armorer slid a rifle across the counter, an M2010 enhanced sniper rifle, fresh from the case. Flat dark earth chassis, matte black barrel. Elegant, lethal, perfect. Deckard whistled. "Winchester Magnum, kicks like a mule, you sure you can handle it?" Vance finally looked up. Her eyes were gray, not pale but deep, the kind of gray that belonged to storm clouds. For a second the grin on Deckard's face faltered. There was something in her gaze he couldn't read, something steady, dangerous. "I'll manage," she said softly. She ran her hands over the rifle with a touch that was almost reverent, checked the action, tested the trigger on an empty chamber, felt the clean break. Her movements weren't just trained, they were practiced, intimate. Every motion had a reason, every pause a purpose. To the men watching from the doorway, she was quiet, delicate, slow. To her, she was speaking a language they didn't understand. Outside, the wind howled against the tin roof. Inside, she signed the logbook and took the rifle with her, another weight on her shoulder, another judgment in their eyes. By the time she reached the zeroing range, the sun had turned cruel. Heat shimmered off the ground. Metal rests burned the palms. The air smelled of hot brass and old sweat. Alpha Squad was already there, Deckard, Ramirez, Gallo, loud, confident, feeding off each other's noise. Their rifles cracked in sharp rhythm, tight groupings on the targets, laughter between shots. When Vance laid down her mat, the noise changed. She unpacked her tools, ammunition arranged with geometric precision, wind meter beside her logbook, scope waiting to be mounted. Every move was quiet, efficient. She didn't speak, didn't rush. "Look at her," Gallo muttered, "setting up for a picnic." "Hey, Sergeant," Deckard called, voice mocking. "This isn't a library, point and shoot." Vance didn't answer. She attached the scope, using a torque wrench to tighten the screws exactly to spec. She settled behind the rifle, dry-fired once, twice, felt the trigger break, listened to the silence afterward. Then she chambered a round. Her breath stilled, the world shrank. Crack! The recoil bit into her shoulder, familiar, firm, perfect. The shot landed high and right, missed. A few chuckles rippled down the line. Second shot, adjusted windage, logged the clicks, crack, closer but off. Third shot, worse. The pattern was chaos, no grouping, no logic. "Vance," Thorne's voice boomed over the speaker, irritation like acid. "That's a brand new weapon system. It should be shooting dimes out of the box. Get it together." Her expression didn't change, but something in her eyes did, a flicker of thought, not fear. The rifle felt right. Her breathing perfect. The ammunition lot solid. The problem wasn't her. It was the weapon. She kept firing, not to hit the bullseye now, but to collect data. Each shot told a story, and the story was wrong. The dispersion wasn't random. It was inconsistent, mechanical. Deckard sauntered over, his smile already waiting. "Having trouble? Told you she's got a kick. Gotta hold her tight." "The bedding might be off," she murmured, half to herself. "Or the mount's shifting." He snorted. "Yeah, right, maybe you just can't shoot. Don't blame the tool, Sergeant. A real shooter can make any rifle sing." He turned, fired, hit center mass, punctuation on his insult. The range went cold for a short break. The shooters left their rifles, gathering at the cooler. Deckard lingered, glancing around. When the safety officer called Vance over to sign paperwork, he saw his chance. He crouched near her rifle, pretending to pick something up. His body shielded the weapon from view. His hand slipped under the chassis, turned a small action screw, just a quarter turn too tight. Then he adjusted the optic mount, loosening one fastener by barely a hair. Not enough to be noticed, enough to destroy precision. It was sabotage so subtle even a seasoned tech might miss it. Elegant, cruel, cowardly. By the time she returned, the sun was descending, the range bathed in gold. The final test of the day, cold bore, 500 meters, one shot, one hit. She knew something was wrong, but refusing to shoot wasn't an option. She lay down, adjusted her breathing, let the crosshairs rest on target, and fired. The round missed by feet. Dust bloomed where the impact hit, far from the steel plate. Thorne's voice crackled with finality. "That's it, Vance. You're done for the day. Report to my office at 800. Think hard about whether you belong here." Laughter followed, quiet, venomous. She packed in silence, every motion deliberate, calm on the outside. Inside, her mind was already dissecting every variable, every detail. The pattern of misses, the recoil impulse, the tension in the action screws. They thought they had broken her. They hadn't broken anything, they just sharpened it. That night she sat alone in her quarters, the rifle case beside her. The wind still howled outside, pressing against the window like it wanted in. She didn't sleep, just stared at the weapon case in silence, the faint reflection of herself in the metal. They didn't know what she used to be, what she'd done, what her name once meant. And she wasn't about to tell them, not yet. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Tomorrow, When she stepped onto that range again, the wind wouldn't be the only thing cutting through Fort Garrick. What does resolve sound like? Sometimes it's silence. Sometimes it's the metallic click of a bolt sliding home. The morning sun rose over Fort Garrick with that pale, merciless light that stripped color from everything it touched. The desert was still, the wind not yet awake, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Sergeant Ella Vance stood at the range again, the same rifle case in her hand, the same calm in her eyes. No one spoke to her when she arrived. They didn't have to. Every man there expected a spectacle, another failure, another quiet embarrassment that would end with her on the next transport out. Colonel Thorne watched from his command vehicle, arms crossed. He looked tired, though he'd never admit it. His job was to evaluate shooters, not rebuild them. He didn't have the time or patience for lost causes, and in his mind, Vance was already gone. The first day of qualification began like a ritual of intimidation. Thorne's voice carried across the range, hard and absolute. "You're standing at the edge of the gauntlet," he said. 167 targets, variable distances, unpredictable wind. You move between stations under time. You hit or you don't. Miss 3 consecutive targets and you're out. Miss 10 overall, you're out. Less than 10% of shooters pass. Look left. Look right. Most of you won't be here on day 3. Even the veterans shifted at that. Deckard smirked, but it didn't reach his eyes. Ramirez rolled his shoulders, cracking his neck. Gallo spat into the dust. Vance stood still, hands behind her back, expression unreadable. When the whistle blew, the first shots rang out like thunder. The valley echoed with rifle fire, short bursts of rhythm, metal against metal, the high-pitched ping of hits, and the dull silence of misses. Dust lifted in lazy clouds, drifting through the hot morning light. Vance's turn came. She settled behind her rifle, feeling the texture of the mat beneath her elbows, the faint tremor of the ground beneath her breath. Her scope found the 400-meter plate. She inhaled, exhaled, fired. The round struck 10 feet left. She adjusted, fired again, miss. A third shot, a desperate flyer wide gone. The red flag went up beside her name on the scoreboard. 3 misses. 1 more and she was finished. Ramirez chuckled. "Told you can't hang." "Like I said," Deckard muttered, "tourist." Colonel Thorne slammed his fist against the command console inside the vehicle. "Get her off my range." His voice blasted through the radio, vibrating in the morning air. "She's done." The range officer started toward her, already shaking his head. But before he could speak, Vance lifted her hand, not in panic, not in defiance, but with the calm precision of someone taking control. "Request permission to inspect my weapon, sir," she said, her voice steady. "The colonel says my rifle is malfunctioning due to a suspected mechanical fault," she interrupted, her tone level, every syllable clear. "According to Operational Protocol 723 Bravo, any shooter may call a technical ceasefire for a safety issue. I'm calling it now. 5 minutes to diagnose." The officer hesitated. "Sergeant, that's regulation," she finished quietly. "If you deny it, I'll log a safety violation. Your call." For a heartbeat, the range froze. Thorne's voice crackled over the radio, sharp, furious. "Fine, 5 minutes, then you're gone." The air thickened with tension. 5 minutes, 3 missed targets, 1 weapon, 1 chance. She knelt beside her mat, opening her toolkit. The other shooters stopped firing, curiosity outweighing cruelty. Even the wind seemed to pause. Her movements were a ballet of precision, deliberate, fluid, silent. She loosened the action screws, lifted the rifle's heart, the barreled action free from its chassis. Nobody field-stripped a sniper rifle mid-qualification. Nobody. But Ella Vance wasn't nobody. The steel gleamed faintly in the harsh sunlight. Her fingers moved like they had muscle memory older than the men watching her. She ran her thumb along the action bedding, searching for flaws invisible to the untrained eye. A small frown touched her lips. Then her hand froze. "There." The optics rail, one of the torque screws, just slightly raised, barely noticeable. To anyone else it would have looked perfect. To her it was the heartbeat of the problem. She took her wrench, tightened it with exact pressure, 65 inch-pounds, no more. Then she checked every other fastener, every contact point, every screw. Still, something nagged at her. The horizontal spread was one problem, but the vertical inconsistency that came from deeper. Her eyes narrowed. She tilted the action toward the light, shining her small LED pen across the bedding block. And she saw it, a tiny glint. A sliver of metal no bigger than a grain of sand, wedged where the action met the chassis. A shim, deliberate. Her heart didn't race. Her face didn't change. She just stared at it, her expression like stone. Then, with tweezers, she plucked it free. She held the fragment between her fingers for a long second. Then she looked up, scanning the firing line until her eyes locked on Deckard. He was watching her, his smirk gone, color drained from his face. No words, no accusations, just a look. A quiet verdict. Then she crushed the sliver under her boot and went back to work. Every movement was methodical now, mechanical, certain. She seated the action back into the chassis, tightened the screws in sequence. The sound of each torque click was a heartbeat counting down. 4 minutes, 12 seconds. She lay behind the rifle once more, chambered a round. "Shooter ready," she said. Thorne's voice was cold. "Let's see it, Sergeant. 2 misses on the board, make it count." Vance didn't answer. She adjusted her wind meter, watching the flag at the edge of the range flutter weakly. The crosswind danced in irregular gusts, a left-to-right drift she read as instinctively as breath. 32 milliseconds of correction, 48 elevation clicks for drop. She inhaled, the world disappeared. Crack! The sound rolled across the valley, followed by a pause so long it felt like silence itself had forgotten how to move. Then, faint and distant. Ping! The bullet struck dead center. A murmur rippled down the firing line. The range officer blinked. "Hit," he whispered. Vance worked the bolt, smooth, efficient, chambered another, adjusted, fired. Ping! Another ping. Target after target fell. 650 meters, 820, 950. Her rhythm became hypnotic, a perfect blend of science and instinct, mathematics and muscle memory. She wasn't shooting anymore. She was performing. The others stopped firing altogether, their rifles hanging forgotten in their hands. Ramirez stood motionless. Gallo exhaled slowly, all replacing mockery. Even Deckard couldn't move. Colonel Thorne lowered his binoculars. His jaw was set tight, but behind it was something different, recognition. Beside him, his young aide, Lieutenant Kenji, frowned at his tablet. "Sir," he said quietly, "I pulled Sergeant Vance's full file. It's heavily redacted, but her last assignment, she wasn't just an instructor. She was the lead for the Special Operations Target Interdiction course. She wrote most of the doctrine we use for advanced long-range engagement." Thorne didn't look away from the range. Her call sign. Kenji swallowed. "Ghost, sir." The colonel's face changed, not with shock, but with something deeper. A memory, a story. Ghost. The name whispered through the special operations world like myth. A sniper that wasn't supposed to exist. The one who could read wind like scripture. The one who'd made a kill shot in the Hindu Kush mountains that defied ballistics, physics, logic. The shot no one ever confirmed. The shot nobody could replicate. Ghost had been rumor, legend, superstition, and she was standing right there. Thorne exhaled slowly, lowering his binoculars. For the first time in a long time, he felt humility. On the line, Vance kept firing. Her face was blank, her breathing controlled, her hands steady as stone. The steel plates rang one after another, an orchestra of precision. Ping, ping, ping. She flowed through targets, 50, 75, 100, her world narrowing to calculations and silence. Heat shimmered off her barrel, distorting her sight picture, but she compensated instinctively. Deckard felt his stomach twist. Each impact was a reminder not just of her skill, but of what he'd done. He saw the ghost of the metal shim she'd crushed into the dirt, his own cowardice made visible. She had every reason to destroy him publicly, to name him, to end his career. But she didn't. She just kept firing. Her restraint hurt worse than punishment ever could. When the count passed 100, even Thorne's voice was gone. No orders, no criticism, just the sound of the rifle and the wind. The sun rose high and merciless. Sweat beaded on her temple, rolled down her cheek, but her aim never wavered. Her focus was absolute, a quiet force, an ocean disguised as calm. When the final ping echoed through the valley, the range stood still. She set the rifle down gently, cleared the chamber, logged her result. Thorne stepped out from the command vehicle, boots crunching against gravel. Every man parted as he approached. He stopped beside her, his shadow falling across the mat. He looked from her to the rifle, then to the far targets glinting in the heat. "The wind's impossible today," he said quietly. Vance didn't look up. "The wind is just data." The colonel was silent for a moment. Then he nodded once, slow, deliberate. The kind of nod that carried weight, apology, and respect all at once. "Briefing at 1800, he said. "You're on the primary roster for Operation Nightfall." He walked away. Deckard stood frozen, shame burning like acid in his throat. He couldn't speak, couldn't even meet her eyes. He turned and walked off the range, the sound of his boots lost in the wind. And Vance, she stayed. Alone again, the last one packing up her gear as the horizon swallowed the sun. For her, victory didn't feel like triumph. It felt like gravity, a quiet reminder that every shot, every breath, every small act of control came with a price. Sometimes dignity doesn't need to shout, it simply acts. What does a legend do when no one's watching? She rebuilds quietly, piece by piece. The desert night had teeth. After the chaos of the range, the silence felt unnatural, heavy, watchful, as though the wind itself was listening. The lights at Fort Garrick burned low, flickering against the long rows of barracks, throwing restless shadows across the gravel. Inside one of those dim-lit rooms, Sergeant Outlived Vance sat alone at a steel table, her rifle laid open before her like a patient in surgery. The weapon was disassembled with reverent precision. Every spring, pin, and screw rested on oiled cloth, gleaming faintly under a single hanging bulb. The smell of solvent and gun oil filled the air, sharp and metallic. Vance moved with ritual calm, cotton patch through the bore, bolt face wiped clean, extractor checked, chamber light inspected. Each movement was slow, deliberate, measured. She was no longer fighting a battle against the range or the colonel or the men who doubted her. She was fighting for something quieter, balance. The rhythmic click of her torque wrench marked the passage of time. 65 inch-pounds. Click. 65. Click. Perfection repeated. Her hands, small but steady, moved as though remembering something older than discipline, something spiritual. Out the window, she could see the glow of the armory floodlight, and beyond that, the long dark of the valley. Tomorrow, that valley would come alive again with the crack of rifles and the shouts of instructors. But tonight, it was still a vast, empty theater where the ghosts of failure and pride whispered together. The door opened behind her. Deckard hesitated in the doorway, his silhouette framed by the dim hallway light. He looked smaller somehow, stripped of the swagger that had clung to him like armor. He stood there for a long moment before speaking, as if rehearsing words that refused to form. "Sergeant," he began, voice low. Vance didn't answer. She didn't even look up. He stepped closer, boots scuffing the floor. The smell of dust and sweat followed him in. He started again, then stopped. His throat worked as he tried to find the courage to say the thing that mattered. Finally, he placed something on the edge of the table, a brand new torque wrench, still sealed in its plastic case. He didn't explain, Didn't apologize, just set it down, his hand trembling slightly. Then he took a step back. "You shouldn't have had to prove it," he said quietly. "Not like that." Vance's eyes flicked up for the first time, meeting his. For a moment, the air between them seemed to still. Then she looked back to her rifle, the faintest nod dipping her chin, barely perceptible but unmistakable. It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't even acceptance, it was acknowledgement. Deckard exhaled like a man who'd been holding his breath all day. "Thank you," he said, though for what neither of them would ever quite know. He turned and left, the door closing softly behind him. The bulb buzzed overhead. Vance returned to her work, the sound of the wrench once again filling the quiet. Click, 65, click. Outside, the wind began to stir, whispering over the range like a reminder that nothing stays still for long. Morning came gray and thin, crawling over the desert like a reluctant confession. The gauntlet would continue today, and this time, the men who once dismissed her now watched with a different kind of attention. The mood was subdued. Deckard's squad said little. Ramirez chewed on his nerves. Gallo cleaned his rifle with the precision of someone who needed to keep his hands busy. Colonel Thorne's posture on the observation deck was tighter than usual, not angry, not skeptical. Focused. Vance arrived at the line just as the sun broke over the ridge. Her movements were unhurried, almost meditative. She laid out her mat, ammunition, range, book. The same methodical rhythm, no fanfare. The colonel's voice carried across the speakers. "Today you'll shoot from movement, transition distances, stress drills, same rules, miss 3, you're done. Move." The teams fanned out. Dust rose as boots pounded between stations. Vance dropped prone at her first point, 300 meters. Wind calm. She fired once. Ping. Second target, 400. Ping. The men near her lane tried not to stare, but the sound of each hit pulled their attention like gravity. She rolled, sprinted to the next position. The movement was clean, controlled without waste. Her breathing never spiked. Even under the desert sun, she seemed carved from composure itself. The colonel tracked her through his binoculars. She was faster than his watch said she should be. Her transitions weren't frantic, they were timed. Predictable in the way only mastery could be. By the halfway mark, she'd hit every target, 83 for 83. Ramirez cursed under his breath after a miss and looked up just in time to catch her reloading, expression calm as a monk's. "She's not human," he muttered. Gallo shook his head. "She's human, we're just not built the same." Deckard didn't speak. He just kept shooting, quietly, carefully, his ego folded away somewhere deep and uncomfortable. The range echoed with a symphony of gunfire, dust, heat, the acrid tang of cordite, but through all of it one rhythm cut clean, Vance's. Every cycle of her bolt was a metronome of discipline. The day bled into afternoon. Targets further, wind stronger. The valley shimmered in the distance, heat waves twisting the air. The final string began, long-range engagements at over 1,200 meters. Vance adjusted her dope sheet with small, deliberate marks. 1,220 meters, 1,340, 1,450. The numbers were abstract, but her understanding of them was. She could feel distance the way others felt temperature. She dialed her scope, inhaled, fired. Ping! Even Thorne had to smile barely, but it was there. By the time she reached the final ridge, her score was flawless. 166 hits, one target left. The last plate sat at the edge of visibility, 1,500 meters, a sliver of steel glinting in the trembling heat. The wind at that range was erratic, curling in unpredictable eddies. It was the kind of shot that turned good shooters into ghosts or fools. Vance lay prone, adjusted her bipod, and waited. The silence was total. She closed her eyes, listened. The desert spoke in small, coded languages, the shift of sand, the hiss of breeze against brush, the low hum of heat moving across rock. She read it all. Then she opened her eyes, exhaled, and squeezed the trigger. The rifle cracked. 1, 2, 3. Ping! A perfect hit. The scoreboard blinked. 167/167. For a long moment no one moved, no one breathed. Then slowly the reality of it settled in: a perfect run, unheard of, unthinkable. The wind picked up again, sweeping across the range, carrying the faint sound of applause made by nature itself. Vance cleared her chamber, set the rifle on safe, and began packing up. No smile, no celebration, just quiet, controlled efficiency. Thorne descended from the tower, his steps heavy on the gravel. Every operator on the line parted as he approached. He stopped beside her, watching her stow her rifle. "The wind's supposed to be impossible today," he said softly. She looked up, expression calm. "The wind is just data." A silence passed between them, long, heavy, honest. Then he nodded once, slow and certain. "Briefing at 1800, he said. "You're on the primary roster, Operation Nightfall." When he walked away, the others stared after him. It wasn't common for Marcus Thorne to yield to anyone, but respect, once earned, changed the shape of a man. As the range emptied, Deckard lingered at the edge, hands buried in his pockets. He watched her finish packing, her face unreadable. When she finally stood and slung the rifle over her shoulder, he found himself speaking before he thought. "Why didn't you tell them who you were?" Vance paused. The late sun burned red across the horizon, turning the desert gold and fire. She looked at him, and in that look there was no pride, no anger, just a quiet kind of truth. "Names don't hit targets," she said. Then she walked away, leaving the sound of her boots swallowed by the wind. That night, long after the base had gone silent again, she sat in the armory's cleaning bay under the harsh glow of a single bulb. Her rifle lay across the table, stripped and gleaming. She worked through the same ritual: wipe, oil, reassemble, test. The sound of metal on cloth filled the room like a prayer. For her this was peace, the stillness after the storm, the quiet act of restoring what chaos tried to destroy. She seated the bolt, cycled it, and felt the clean, perfect lockup of the action. She exhaled through her nose, a small, invisible smile almost forming. Outside, the desert breathed again, a low wind whispering through the wire fences, carrying the scent of dust and gun oil. Tomorrow there would be another mission, another briefing, another place where men would judge before understanding. But tonight, in this pool of light, the ghost rested. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply endures. How many times can a soldier rebuild herself before there's nothing left to rebuild? The sun rose cold over Fort Garrick, spilling thin light through the narrow windows of the operations building. The walls hummed with the sound of generators, the low murmur of briefing voices, and the faint clatter of gear being checked and rechecked. The air smelled of coffee, oil, and anticipation, that peculiar stillness that comes before something dangerous begins. Sergeant Olav Vance sat near the back of the room, her posture straight, her expression neutral. Around her, Alpha Squad leaned forward over the map projected across the briefing table. Colonel Thorne stood at the head of it, hands clasped behind his back, his voice low and deliberate. "Operation Nightfall," he began, his tone stripped of ceremony. "Recon and interdiction mission, Northern Corridor. Objective: eliminate a logistics convoy supplying an insurgent command cell. Timing is critical. You'll move under cover of darkness through the canyon. Approach insertion by rotor at grid 27 Alpha. Exfil via secondary route after the strike. Expect counterfire." He paused, eyes flicking toward Vance for just a fraction of a second. The gesture was small, but it carried meaning. Deckard noticed, so did everyone else. Thorne continued, "We've got limited drone coverage. Thermal interference in the valley is a problem. You'll rely on optics and instinct. Sergeant Vance will provide overwatch and coordinate long-range support." The words landed like a quiet shockwave. A few heads turned toward her. No one argued, not openly, but the silence that followed said enough. The woman they'd mocked days earlier was now the eye that would keep them alive. Vance met no one's gaze. She just nodded once, understood. When the meeting broke, the others gathered their gear in subdued quiet. Deckard lingered near the table, pretending to check his rifle case while watching her. She moved with that same surgical calm, deliberate, efficient. Her face gave nothing away, but her eyes held something unreadable, as if she'd already stepped mentally into the mission. When the colonel approached her, the room thinned. Men found reasons to be elsewhere. Thorne stopped beside her, his tone low. "You know why I'm assigning you this?" She nodded. "Because the margin for error is small." "Because I trust you now," he said quietly. For a moment the words hung there, fragile, almost awkward. Trust was not something Marcus Thorne offered easily, and never this soon. Vance's expression didn't change, but something in her shoulders softened. "I won't let them down." "I know." He hesitated, then added, "Don't let yourself down either." She turned to look at him, then really look, and for the first time he saw not the myth, not the record, not the ghost whispered about in barrack stories. He saw the cost of it all, the loneliness behind the precision. By dusk they were airborne. The helicopter carved through the cooling desert air, its rotors cutting rhythmic thunder into the night. Below them, the land was a blur of dark ridges and pale dust. The interior lights were dimmed. Faces were half-lit, half-shadow. Each man inside sat in his own world, minds replaying training, doubts, rituals. Vance sat near the open door, goggles down, the wind clawing at her sleeve. Her rifle rested across her knees, strapped tight in its case. She stared out into the night, the lights of the base shrinking behind them until they were just stars swallowed by distance. Deckard sat across from her. He tried not to look, but every so often his eyes drifted toward her. He'd spent years thinking strength was something loud, physical, proven in front of others. But watching her now, silent, still, carved from patience, he understood for the first time that real strength didn't need an audience. The bird dipped low, slicing through the dark. The intercom crackled, 2 minutes to drop. Thorne's voice came over the channel, calm and clipped. "Alpha, check comms." "Alpha 1 green," Deckard responded. "Alpha 2 green," Ramirez said. "Alpha 3 green," Gallo followed. Vance keyed her mic. "Overwatch green." They landed hard. Dust stormed around the rotors as boots hit the ground. The air was colder here, thinner. The canyon stretched ahead, narrow, jagged walls that caught the faint glow of moonlight like knife edges. Vance peeled off from the group, climbing the high ridge to the west. Her pace was steady, her gear tight to her body, the rifle slung across her back. The others disappeared below her into the dark ravine, moving toward the convoy route. At the top, she settled in behind a rocky outcrop, unrolled her mat, and assembled her rifle piece by piece. The night was quiet except for the distant hum of engines far away, moving slow. She checked her data, range finder readout, wind meter, thermal drift. Then she waited. Waiting, that was the real discipline, the stillness that ate at lesser shooters. But for her, it was home, the silence of observation, the patience of a hunter who doesn't measure time in seconds but in breaths. Minutes passed, then hours, the desert's heartbeat slowed. Finally the convoy appeared. Faint dots of heat on her scope, trucks, armored vehicles, one lead technical with a mounted gun. The radio clicked softly in her ear. "Alpha 1 to Overwatch, eyes on." "Visual confirmed," she replied. Her voice was a whisper, but it carried the steadiness of command. 6 vehicles, 1 gunner, spacing uneven. You've got 30 seconds before you're compromised." "Copy," Deckard said. "On your mark." She exhaled slowly. Crosshairs found the driver of the lead truck. Wind, 3.4 meters per second right to left. Correction, 4 clicks. Distance, 860 meters. She waited for the gust to settle, finger feathering the trigger. Mark! Crack! The driver dropped before the sound reached him. The truck veered sideways, crashing into the ridge wall. Confusion erupted. Shouts, brakes, gunfire, chaos blooming in the dark. Vance didn't flinch. She cycled the bolt, adjusted for range, fired again. Ping. Gunner down, third shot, fourth. Each one clean, each one absolute. Below, Alpha Squad moved in. Controlled bursts of fire cut through the noise. Muzzle flashes stuttered like lightning. The battle was brief, surgical. When the final echo died, Deckard's voice came through her comm again, strained but exhilarated. Overwatch convoy neutralized. 0 friendlies down. You still with us, Ghost? She almost smiled, almost, still here. Wouldn't be without you, he said. Copy that, she replied. Her tone was dry, but her heart gave a small, traitorous pulse of warmth. Connection, fragile, fleeting, but real. They regrouped at the exfil point before dawn, the horizon bleeding pale gray. The helicopter came low, kicking up dust. One by one, they climbed aboard. When Vance was the last to step on, Thorne reached out a gloved hand to steady her. She accepted it without words. The flight back was silent. Exhaustion settled over them, heavy and strange, the kind that isn't just physical but moral. The kind that comes when you've seen what you're capable of and still wonder what it's costing you. Vance leaned her head against the cold metal wall of the cabin, eyes half closed. Below them, the valley stretched endless and indifferent. Thorne sat across from her, studying her quietly. Finally, he said, "How do you do it? That calm?" Her eyes stayed closed. "It's not calm," she said softly. "It's control. Calm is what people see. Control is what it takes to survive." He nodded slowly. "You ever lose it?" Once. Her voice was quiet, didn't end well. He didn't press, he didn't need to. By the time they touched down at Fort Garrick, the sun had climbed, blinding and pure, like nothing had happened. But everyone on that chopper knew something had changed. Word spread fast. The story of the Ghost, the sniper who hit 167 targets, the one who saved an entire squad in silence, became legend all over again. But for Vance, legends were just noise. She had no interest in being remembered, only in being right. That evening she returned to the same small armory bay, same table, same ritual. The rifle was already clean, but she stripped it anyway, habit, comfort, discipline. She worked by touch, not sight. Each piece was a memory, a confession. Outside, the base was alive with laughter and music, small celebrations after a victory. But she stayed where she was, the hum of the bulb her only companion. Deckard appeared again at the doorway. This time he didn't hesitate. He leaned against the frame, hands deep in his pockets, a quiet humility in his posture. "You know," he said, "most of us spend years trying to become someone like you. You make it look easy." "It's not," she said, not looking up. "I know," he hesitated, "but you still do it." She paused, setting down a cloth. "I don't do it to be seen, Deckard. I do it because someone has to." He nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "That's what scares me about you, Sergeant." She gave the smallest tilt of her head. "Good." He left laughing softly, the sound echoing down the hall. When the door closed, Vance sat alone again, the hum of the light filling the space where noise should have been. She looked at the rifle, gleaming under the glow, the instrument that had been broken, sabotaged, redeemed. Her reflection shimmered in the polished barrel, fragmented, incomplete but real. Outside, the wind began to rise, brushing against the windows like an old friend. She listened to it for a long moment before whispering, almost to herself. "The wind is just data." But her eyes said something else. That even data can feel like destiny when you've carried its weight long enough. What do you do when the ghosts you've outrun finally catch up? Sleep didn't come for Sergeant Vance that night. It rarely did after missions. Victories had a strange way of feeling hollow, too quiet, too controlled, like a note that rings too long after the music stops. Fort Garrick slept around her, the hum of generators and the occasional bark of a night guard the only sounds that broke the silence. In the barracks, laughter had faded to snores. The celebration outside the canteen had burned itself out hours ago, leaving only the faint smell of smoke and spilled whiskey. But Vance sat on her bunk, still in her undershirt and fatigues, boots unlaced, staring at the rifle case across from her. The mission had gone exactly as planned, every shot true, every man accounted for. The colonel had commended the team. Even Deckard, for once, hadn't ruined it with words. And yet she felt nothing. No pride, no relief. Just that familiar, empty weight pressing behind her sternum, the quiet ache of someone who'd done their job too well for too long. Her hands trembled faintly as she unlatched the case. Inside, the rifle gleamed perfect, immaculate, deadly. Her reflection stared back at her in its polished barrel, pale eyes, hair pulled back, skin marked by wind and fatigue. She looked like someone she used to know. She reached out, tracing the edge of the weapon. That's when she heard it, faint at first. The wind outside, whispering through the narrow cracks in the barracks wall, catching on something metallic. The sound was eerily similar to a breath she once heard years ago, in another desert, another mission. And just like that, the past uncoiled inside her. It had been in the Hindu Kush, years before Fort Garrick, before she was Sergeant Vance, before the rank, before the silence. Back then she had a partner, Lieutenant Cole Maddox. He was sharp-eyed, loud, reckless in a way only people who hadn't failed yet could afford to be. Together, they were Ghost Team 2, deep insertion snipers under the Special Operations Target Interdiction Command. Long-range reconnaissance, precision elimination, high-value interdiction. She was the calm, he was the chaos. The perfect balance. Until the day the wind betrayed them. They'd been positioned on a barren ridge for almost 14 hours, overwatching a small valley village where intel reported a high-profile arms courier would pass through. It was supposed to be simple, one shot, clean extraction. But simplicity never lasts. The wind had shifted, not by much, just enough to change everything. "Call it again," Cole had said, peering through his scope. She checked her meter, 3.6, full value. "Copy that." He adjusted his dope, steady, confident. But then came the convoy. Not one vehicle, 5, not a courier, an entire insurgent command group. The stakes had tripled in seconds. The call for authorization went dead, comms jammed. Vance felt the weight of it, that terrible choice soldiers aren't supposed to make alone. Take the shot and risk exposure, or hold fire and let the enemy vanish back into the mountains. Cole looked at her. "We can't let them go." She hesitated, without confirmation. "Trust your gut." He said it like it was easy, like instinct could replace orders. When he fired, she was already adjusting for wind. She squeezed her trigger a fraction of a second after him. 2 shots echoed through the valley, twin cracks slicing through the thin air. 2 confirmed kills. Then came the return fire. Mortars heavy, wild. They ran, sprinting over jagged rock as the mountain exploded behind them. Dust and fire filled the air. Cole was ahead of her, laughing, actually laughing, until the sound stopped. A fragment of shrapnel had torn through his side. She dragged him behind a ridge, hands slick with blood, the world around them collapsing in thunder and light. "Go," he'd said, breath ragged. "You've got range, I don't." "No," she'd hissed, voice shaking. "We both go." He smiled, faint but sure. "Ghosts don't travel in pairs, alas." Then he pressed the trigger of his backup rifle, sending one last round into the oncoming truck. The explosion swallowed the rest. By the time extraction came, the ridge was gone. So was he. The mission went down as successful. 2 primary targets neutralized. 1 operator KIA. No mention of the decision, no report of the unauthorized shot. She never told them she was the one who gave the wind call that led him to fire. She carried that silence like a second weapon, clean, polished, deadly. The memory dissolved like smoke. She blinked, realizing she'd been gripping the edge of the rifle case too hard. Her knuckles ached. The wind outside howled once more, and for a heartbeat, she could have sworn she heard his voice again, faint, like a ghost carried on the air. Trust your gut. She exhaled shakily, pressing her palm flat against the metal. I did, she whispered, and it cost you. The door creaked. Deckard stood there hesitant. You're up, he said softly. You don't sleep much, do you? She didn't answer right away. I used to, she murmured. He stepped closer, leaning against the bunk across from her. The guys are saying you don't miss, that you're some kind of machine. She looked up, expression unreadable. Machines don't shake, she said, holding up her hand. The tremor was barely visible, but it was there. Machines don't remember. Deckard's usual grin didn't come. Instead, he nodded slowly, eyes darkening. You know, the colonel, talking about putting you in charge of marksmanship doctrine for the next phase. Full rewrite. He said we could all learn something from you. She closed the case and stood. They'll forget by next month. He frowned. Maybe, but I won't. There was something in his tone, not flirtation, not bravado, respect, gratitude even. She didn't quite know what to do with it. Get some rest, Corporal, she said, brushing past him toward the door. Outside, the early dawn was breaking, cold, silver, indifferent. The desert stretched out beyond the base, wide and merciless, the same as it had always been. She stood there for a long time, feeling the wind move across her face. It carried dust, cold memory. Thorne approached quietly, a steaming mug of coffee in his hand. You're early, he said. I never left, she replied. He offered her the cup. We've got satellite data on last night's strike. Perfect execution. The brass is already talking commendations. I don't want one. He smiled faintly, didn't think so. They stood in silence, watching the light crawl over the valley. Then, after a while, he said, I looked deeper into your record. Vance didn't turn. You shouldn't have. Probably not. He took a sip. You were Ghost Team too, weren't you? Her eyes flickered once, a small betrayal of emotion, but enough. He nodded to himself. I knew Cole Maddox back in Kandahar. Hell of a shot, hell of a laugh. She said nothing. His file says he bled out on extraction, Thorne continued softly. But it never mentioned you were there. She met his gaze, now steady, almost defiant. Because I erased it. Why? Her voice was low. Because ghosts don't explain themselves, Colonel. They just finish the job. He studied her for a long moment, then quietly, and when the job done. She didn't answer. The question hung there like smoke. He finally nodded, stepping back. You'll be briefing the next training rotation. Teach them what the wind really means. She gave the smallest hint of a smile. It's just data, remember. He chuckled under his breath. You keep telling yourself that, Sergeant. Maybe someday you'll believe it. When he left, the base slowly came alive behind her, voices rising, engines starting, the day pulling its weight again. Vance remained still for a while longer. The sky had turned from silver to gold, and for a moment she closed her eyes. The wind brushed against her face, soft now, almost gentle. In it she thought she heard a voice again, not haunting this time, not accusing, just familiar. Ghosts don't travel in pairs. She opened her eyes and looked toward the horizon, where the desert met the sun. Maybe they do, she whispered. We just carry the other one with us. Her hand brushed the rifle case once more, the weight of it grounding her to the present. Then she turned back toward the base, shoulders straight, steps measured. There was work to do, and ghosts, as she'd learned, didn't rest until the work was finished. How do you teach men to see the wind? That question haunted Olav Vance long after dawn. It followed her through the day like a shadow, whispering behind every order, every round fired downrange, every curious glance from a soldier trying to understand the quiet woman who never missed. By the third day after Operation Nightfall, she had become both legend and lesson. Recruits from other divisions gathered at the perimeter of Range 7 to watch her teach. Some came out of respect, others out of skepticism. Everyone came to see what perfection looked like. Vance didn't speak much during instruction. She didn't perform. Her demonstrations were minimalist, stripped down to pure function, small corrections, quiet notes, a precision that spoke louder than lectures. At one point, a young corporal raised his hand. "Ma'am, how do you know when to trust the wind meter and when to trust your gut?" She looked at him for a long moment. "You don't trust either," she said softly. "You trust the space between." The recruit stared, trying to decode the meaning. She didn't elaborate. Some lessons had to be lived, not explained. By noon, the desert heat had swallowed the horizon. The air shimmered. The flags along the range poles rippled unpredictably, caught between crosscurrents. She fired a demonstration shot at 900 meters dead center, one fluid motion, and stood, brushing sand from her knee. Colonel Thorne watched from the observation platform, arms folded. He wasn't smiling, but there was something in his face, the grudging admiration of a man who'd finally recognized his better. He met her on the line as the trainees packed up. "The brass loved the Nightfall results," he said. "You made us look like a well-oiled machine. They're asking if you'll help shape doctrine for the new reconnaissance teams." She nodded once. "If it's about accuracy, I'll do it." "It's more than that," he said quietly. "They want you for active operations again." That stopped her. "I thought I was done with that side of the house." "You were, until they saw your file." His tone dropped. "Word spreading through channels the ghost's not a myth anymore. There's chatter about a deep intercept op, something off book. You'd be command sniper, no oversight, no reporting chain." Her jaw tightened. "You know what that means." "I do," Thorne said, "and I know what it costs. That's why I'm telling you first." She stared past him toward the open range. Heat blurred the targets into ghosts. "If I say no." "You won't." He was right, she didn't answer. When the sun fell, she was still there, alone, lying prone behind her rifle, watching the horizon fade from gold to gray. The wind shifted as night came on, whispering across the valley floor like a living thing. It carried dust, memory, and the faint hum of faraway rotors, a reminder that the world outside Garrick was still burning. She didn't move, just breathed. Every shot she'd ever taken came back in flashes, the faces she'd never seen, the lives she'd ended from miles away. Precision had its price, and the currency was memory. She learned to live with it by calling it duty, but there were nights when even that word felt too fragile. The next morning, she was summoned to the operations hangar. The door opened to reveal Thorne and a stranger waiting beside the map table, a man in a charcoal suit that didn't belong in a desert. He wasn't military, but his posture carried the weight of someone who gave orders to people who did the killing. "Sergeant Vance," he said, extending a hand. "I'm Director Harlan, Intelligence Command. I've been briefed on your recent performance." She didn't take his hand, just nodded. Thorne gave her a small look, equal parts warning and respect. Harlan smiled faintly. "We're assembling a deniable unit. Small, surgical. Our objective's a rogue logistics broker moving prototype weapons across the northern corridor. He's been invisible for 2 years. We believe he's resurfaced in the ruins near Al-Khail." "Believe?" Vance asked. "Enough to send the best." He slid a photo across the table. The image was grainy, satellite captured. A convoy parked near the remains of a walled compound. "You'll provide overwatch and counter-sniper support," he continued. "One shot if necessary. Extraction windows short. You'll be embedded with a forward recon team under Alpha designation." Vance's eyes flicked to Thorne. That's my old squad. Thorne nodded grimly. Deckard's already in. Ramirez and Gallo too. Of course they were. The room felt heavier somehow, not with fear but with inevitability. Vance folded her arms. When? 48 hours, Harlan said. Briefing package will be delivered tonight. Gear up, Sergeant. Ghosts are good at hiding. We're hoping you still remember how to be one. When he left, Thorne lingered. You don't owe them this, he said quietly. She looked down at the map. I don't do it for them. He nodded, then stepped aside. The next 2 days passed in a blur of preparation. Vance stripped her rifle down to its barest components and rebuilt it from zero, not because she doubted it, but because rituals mattered. Every motion was an act of control, of ownership. She adjusted her dope chart for new atmospheric conditions, recalibrated her optics, swapped in a lighter bipod. Deckard found her late on the second night, still in the armory, the table littered with tools and data sheets. You're going, aren't you? He said. She didn't look up. You're in the briefing, you already know. Yeah, he muttered. I just hoped maybe you'd say no, thought you were done being a ghost. She tightened a screw. Ghosts don't retire, Deckard, they fade. He leaned against the doorway, arms folded. You know, back on the range, when I messed with your rifle, I thought I was proving something. Now I get it. You didn't need to prove anything to us. We needed to prove we were worth standing next to you. Her hands paused. Slowly she looked at him. And now? Now, he said, voice low, I just want to make sure we come back. She nodded once, small, but it meant everything. The mission began before sunrise. The sky was still black when the transport lifted off, the rotors cutting through the cold air. Vance sat by the open door again, the desert below reduced to darkness and memory. Deckard sat beside her this time, quiet, focused, not the man he'd once been. They landed in silence, the night swallowing them whole. The air smelled of dust and old fire. The ruins of Alkyle were ahead, broken walls, collapsed structures, echoes of a war that never really ended. Vance climbed to her overwatch point, scaling jagged rock with her rifle strapped tight to her back. From there, the valley unfolded beneath her, shadows moving, lights flickering faintly between cracked walls. She lay prone, adjusted her scope, and waited. Below, Alpha Squad advanced, ghosts among ghosts. The mission moved like clockwork for the first hour, positions established, movement silent, target convoy confirmed. Then the silence broke. A single shot. Sharp, clean, close. Sniper fire, Deckard's voice cut through the radio. South wall, 3 o'clock high. Vance's scope was already moving. The counter-sniper was good, disciplined, precise. Whoever he wasn't some hired gun. She exhaled slowly, scanning. Nothing. Then a flash of glass, brief and distant, near the broken dome of an old mosque. Got you. She adjusted windage, calculated the hold. 1,180 meters right crosswind. She breathed, steady, steady. The rifle cracked. Silence. Then a figure slumped sideways in her scope. Target neutralized, she said quietly. Copy, Deckard replied, breathless, moving. The rest of the engagement was brief, brutal, efficient. When it ended, dawn was bleeding over the horizon, the ruins painted in pale gold and smoke. Vance stayed behind her scope, scanning the valley long after the gunfire stopped. That's when she saw it, the sniper she'd just dropped, lying half-hidden among rubble. His face was visible now in the morning light. She froze. It wasn't the face she expected. He was young, maybe 20, a civilian rifle, improvised scope, no insignia, no real training. Her stomach turned. Overwatch, Deckard's voice came through. We're clear, what's your status? She didn't answer, she couldn't. The rifle felt heavy now, like a confession she hadn't meant to make. She closed her eyes and whispered something no one would ever hear, an apology carried off by the wind. Back at Fort Garrick, the debriefing was short, clinical. Mission successful. Target neutralized. One unidentified hostile casualty. Thorne dismissed the team with the usual formalities, but his eyes lingered on Vance as she left the room. He saw the change, subtle but unmistakable. She walked straight to the armory, stripped her rifle, and sat there in silence. For the first time in years, her hands hesitated. The ritual that had always brought peace now felt hollow. Each part she cleaned reflected the same question. How many perfect shots did it take before perfection stopped meaning anything? She set the rifle aside and stared at her reflection in the steel table. The same calm, the same control, but behind her eyes the tremor was growing. Outside, the wind picked up again, sweeping through the base, carrying dust through the cracks and under the doors. It howled like a living thing, ancient, familiar, and merciless. She listened, then whispered almost to herself. The wind is just data. But this time, the words sounded like a lie. When the killing stops, what sound does silence make? For Olav Vance, it was the hum of the air conditioning unit above the barracks ceiling, steady, relentless, pretending nothing had changed. But everything had. It had been 3 days since Al-Kyle. 3 days since she pulled the trigger on a boy who wasn't supposed to be there. The report called him hostile unknown. No insignia, no record, no context. Just a body in the dust and a number in a column. The paperwork was clean. She spent the mornings on the range, teaching recruits to breathe between heartbeats. Spent the afternoons in the armory, dismantling the same weapon that had betrayed her faith in its purpose. And every night, she lay awake counting the seconds between generator hums, exactly 1.8. The same rhythm as a sniper's pulse between shots. Sleep was the enemy now, because in sleep she saw him, the boy. His eyes weren't angry, they were confused, as if even he didn't know why he was there. By the 4th night, she stopped trying to sleep altogether. She stood on the observation deck instead, wrapped in a windbreaker, staring across the desert. The moon hung low, swollen, red. The wind carried faint traces of engine oil and burning sand. Couldn't rest. She didn't have to turn to know the voice. Thorne walked up beside her, his boots slow against the metal grating. He held 2 mugs of coffee, handed her one. She accepted it without speaking. "They're saying it was textbook," he said. "I read the report," she replied. "I wrote it." She glanced at him, surprised. "You?" He nodded. "You saved 6 lives down there, maybe more. Doesn't change how it feels, I know, but it's the truth." Vance stared at the horizon. Truth isn't the same as peace. Thorne sighed. "No, it's not, but sometimes it's all we get." They stood in silence. The wind pressed against them, tugging at her hair. After a moment, she said quietly, "When you first met me, what did you think?" He gave a dry laugh. "Honestly, I thought you were cold, mechanical, the kind of soldier who'd rather talk to a rifle than another human." She almost smiled. "And now?" "Now I think you built the machine so you wouldn't fall apart." Her grip tightened on the mug. "Maybe." He looked at her for a long moment. "They want us for another op." "Already?" Word came down from Harlan this morning. He wants a follow-up strike on a secondary cell linked to the Al-Kyle network. Same area, same conditions. Her jaw tensed. "You're telling me this because—" "Because I told him no," Thorne said firmly. "Not yet." That startled her. "You told intelligence no." "Someone had to." She studied him, eyes narrowing. "Why?" "Because I saw your hands shaking when you cleaned your rifle yesterday." She turned away, embarrassed, angry. "You don't know what that means." "I know what it doesn't," he said. "It doesn't mean control." He took a step closer. "Vance, when's the last time you missed on purpose?" Her head snapped toward him, eyes flashing. "I don't miss." "That's not what I asked." The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Finally she said, voice low, "A long time ago." And I didn't like who I became after. Thorne nodded slowly. Then maybe you should find that person again. She looked down at the desert, vast, indifferent. You can't unlearn precision. Maybe not, but you can aim at something else. He left her standing there with that thought, the coffee cooling in her hands. By morning, she was in the simulator building, standing behind a glass panel as trainees ran urban combat drills below. Deckard was among them, barking orders with newfound authority. He'd changed since Al-Kyle's steadier, quieter. His arrogance burned down to humility. When the session ended, he came up to the control booth, sweat darkening his collar. "Thorne told me about the new op," he said, grabbing a bottle of water. She didn't look at him. "It's not confirmed." "Good, because the team's not ready. Hell, you're not ready." Her eyes snapped to him. "Watch your tone, Corporal." He didn't flinch. "With respect, Sergeant, I've earned it." They locked eyes, soldier to soldier, mirror to mirror. He softened first. "I saw the kid too, Vance, after the fight. We all did." She went still. Deckard set the bottle down gently. "You made the call. I'd have taken the shot too. Difference is you're still carrying it like it was murder." Her voice dropped. "Wasn't it?" "No," he said. "It was survival, maybe not his, but ours." She shook her head slowly. "That's what we always tell ourselves." He exhaled, frustrated but not angry. "You know what makes you different from the rest of us? We try to forget. You remember. You remember so much it's eating you alive." He turned to leave, then stopped at the doorway. "You can keep being a ghost or you can come back to the living. Your call." When he was gone, the room felt colder somehow. That night she opened her locker for the first time in months. Inside was an old field notebook, the one she'd carried back in the Hindu Kush. The cover was worn, the corners soft from years of dust and sweat. Inside, the first page was filled with careful handwriting. "Cole Maddox wind call, 3.4 ms full value. I was off by 1 click." Her chest tightened. She turned the page, notes, ranges, small diagrams of terrain. Then, halfway through the book, a single line stood alone in the center of a page. "If I miss again, let it be mercy." Her throat closed. She slammed the book shut. Outside, a siren wailed, not the drill tone, but the deep, pulsing alarm of an incoming call to arms. She grabbed her gear instinctively. In the operations hall, lights flickered red. Thorne stood over the table, radio pressed to his ear. "Perimeter breach, Eastern Ridge," he barked. "Recon drone spotted 3 vehicles closing fast, no insignia, no IFF signal." "Insurgents?" Deckard asked, running in beside her. "Or something worse," Thorne said. "We're scrambling the quick response team. Vance, you're with me." No briefing, no plan, just reaction. They moved through the compound, boots hammering the concrete. The eastern gate loomed ahead, lights flickering in the storm of sand blowing across the desert floor. The air was thick, electric, the kind of wind that carried both dust and omen. Vance climbed the outer watchtower, set up her rifle and scanned. 3 trucks, unmarked, racing toward the perimeter. "Range 600 meters," she called. "Crosswind 8 left to right." "Engage," Thorne ordered. She took the shot, lead driver, windshield fracture, engine collapse. The truck spun sideways. Second vehicle braked hard. The third swerved, caught a landmine, went up in a bloom of orange flame. Gunfire erupted from the survivors, sporadic, desperate. The base lights turned night into chaos. "Contact confirmed," Deckard shouted through comms. "Hostiles down." The battle lasted less than 4 minutes, then silence. The only sound left was the wind. When they approached the wrecks, the truth hit harder than any bullet. The first truck wasn't loaded with weapons. It carried medical crates, blood packs, trauma kits, food rations. The second, filled with noncombatants, civilians fleeing the northern corridor. Deckard froze. "Oh God." Thorne's face went pale. They were using the same route as the insurgents. No way we could have known. Vance said nothing. She stared at the ground at the hand of a young girl, maybe 10, sticking out from beneath a torn canvas. A silver bracelet glinted on her wrist. Her voice was barely a whisper. We were supposed to protect them. No one answered. That night the report called it a tragic intelligence error. Friendly fire by misidentification. No fault assigned. But inside her, something broke cleanly, silently, like a piece of glass under pressure finally giving way. She walked out to the perimeter wall as dawn crept in. The horizon was red again, just like alkyl. The wind blew hard, carrying the scent of smoke and regret. Thorne found her there, standing motionless, helmet off, rifle hanging loosely at her side. "They're saying the convoy used our coordinates," he said quietly. "The ones we broadcast for last week's drop. Someone leaked them." "Inside." "Maybe. Or maybe the ghosts are finally coming for me," she murmured. He stepped closer. "Vance, listen, you're not." But she cut him off. "If I pull the trigger again, Colonel, I need to know it's for something worth saving." Her eyes met his. There was no anger there, just exhaustion, deep and human. He nodded slowly. "Then we find out who leaked it together." She looked back at the horizon. "Together," she echoed. The sun rose behind them, fierce and unforgiving. The light painted her face gold, then white, then almost transparent, as if she were fading again into the very myth she tried so hard to escape. The ghost was still alive, but now she wasn't sure if that was salvation or punishment. What does redemption sound like in a place where silence has become law? For Sergeant Outlived Vance, it began as static, faint, persistent, whispering through the radio channels that hadn't carried truth in weeks. The wind outside Fort Garrick still carried dust and heat, but now it carried suspicion too. The convoy incident had fractured the base like glass under pressure. Officially, it was over, written off as bad intelligence, buried beneath the weight of bureaucracy. But inside the walls, rumors swirled like sandstorms. Someone had leaked their coordinates. Someone inside had turned their mission into tragedy. And somehow, Vance was back at the center of it all. She felt the stares when she passed through the mess hall, heard the hush in conversation when she entered the armory. The legend of the ghost had twisted again, no longer the sniper who saved a team, but the omen of missions gone wrong. That night she stood alone in the shooting bay. No ear protection, no lights except the soft glow from the red overheads. Her rifle lay dismantled before her like a body on an operating table. She loaded one round, chambered it, exhaled. The shot cracked like thunder, perfect center. Then another and another. By the sixth shot her hands were steady again, not calm, just resigned. The door opened behind her. Thorne stepped in quietly, wearing fatigue pants and a worn gray t-shirt. No rank, just a man. "You trying to make the ghosts jealous?" he asked gently. She lowered the rifle, trying to remember what it feels like to be useful. He came closer, resting his hands on the shooting bench beside her. "You're more useful alive than haunted." She didn't look at him. "That's not what the brass thinks. Harlan's sending a team to investigate the leak. You know what that means." Thorne's jaw tightened. "A scapegoat." She nodded once. "And my name's still the one in the file with the word ghost next to it." He studied her face, the hollowness behind the strength, the exhaustion beneath her discipline. "You think they'll pin it on you?" "I think," she said quietly, "they already have." The next morning, Intelligence Command arrived. 3 black SUVs, no insignia, no ceremony. Director Harlan led the small procession through Fort Garrick like a man walking through his own reflection, calm, confident, unnaturally smooth. He wore the same charcoal suit, the same polished shoes, as if the desert couldn't touch him. He summoned Vance to the interrogation room, not to question her, but to clarify operational oversight. The room was cold, windowless, 2 chairs, 1 file folder. "Sergeant," he began, voice measured. "Let's start simple. Who had access to the drop coordinates for the Al-Kyle operation?" She met his gaze. "Myself, Colonel Thorne, and Intelligence Command." "Specifically?" She said nothing. He smiled faintly. "You're precise in everything, Sergeant. I like that. But precision without cooperation looks a lot like concealment." Her tone didn't change. "You lost civilians. You want it to look like precision failed." Harlan's smile never wavered. "You think this is about blame." "I think it's about control," she said. "And you don't like when someone operates outside your leash." He leaned back in his chair. "Tell me, Vance, when you hit 167 targets in a row, how many of those names do you remember?" Her eyes narrowed. "All of them." That surprised him just for a second. Then the mask returned. "You've done remarkable work," he said. "But your kind of precision belongs in theory, not in practice. Machines make fewer mistakes." Her voice was soft, steady, almost pitying. "Then build one, but it won't carry what I do." "And what's that?" "Regret." Harlan stared at her. For a moment neither spoke. Then he closed the file. "You're dismissed, Sergeant, pending further review." She stood, saluted mechanically, and walked out. Thorne was waiting in the hallway. "How bad?" "Worse," she said. "He's not looking for the truth. He's looking for closure." That night the wind returned hard, endless, a voice against metal. Vance sat in her quarters, boots on the floor, hands wrapped around a mug that had gone cold an hour ago. The room felt smaller than ever. She opened the drawer beside her bunk and pulled out the old field notebook again. The pages fluttered under her fingers until she found the one she'd written the night after Cole died. "If ghosts exist, they don't haunt the battlefield. They haunt the living." She closed it, her pulse steady now, decision forming like dawn at the edge of dark. She left her quarters quietly, moving through the sleeping corridors, past the empty mess, past the range. The stars outside were sharp and merciless. She crossed the tarmac toward the operations hangar, the one with the encrypted comms hub inside. The guards were easy, they trusted her, everyone did. Inside, the comm station hummed with low static, screens casting blue light across her face. She pulled the mission logs, decrypted the transmission records, cross-referenced timestamps. Then she found it. An outgoing data packet sent 12 minutes before the convoy breach. Encrypted, rerouted through Intelligence Command's own relay network. "Harlan." Her hands tightened on the console. Every instinct screamed to report it, to confront him, to expose it all. But she knew how that story would end. The truth didn't survive the chain of command. So she copied the data to a single drive, pocketed it, and erased the log. When she turned to leave, Thorne was standing in the doorway. "I figured I'd find you here," he said softly. She didn't flinch. "You were right, the leak came from command." He nodded slowly, almost sadly. "And now you're going to do something stupid." "I'm going to do something right." "Same thing," he said. They stood in silence for a moment. Two soldiers who had outlived their orders, their wars, maybe even their purpose. Finally he said, "What's your plan?" She held up the drive. "Send it to the only place that still cares what truth looks like, the press liaison channel. They'll court-martial you." "Maybe." He stepped closer. "You sure about this?" She met his eyes. "I'm sure about him." It took him a second to realize she meant Cole. Then he nodded. "All right, let's finish it." They transmitted the file at 300. Silent, anonymous, untraceable. Within hours, the packet had reached external servers. By dawn, the story was already spreading. Internal leak at Fort Garrick Tied to Command Oversight. By noon, Harlan's vehicles were gone. So were his files. He left the base without a word. No confrontation, no charges, just silence, the kind that only power can afford. Vance stood on the runway as his convoy disappeared into the horizon, the heat mirage swallowing it whole. Thorne joined her, his face unreadable. "You think it'll change anything?" he asked. She shook her head. "No, but it'll make it harder for them to lie again." He looked at her. "And you?" She smiled faintly, tired human. "Maybe I'll finally stop shooting at ghosts." 2 weeks later, Fort Garrick fell quiet again. Official reports were redacted, operations restructured, soldiers rotated out. But some stories refused to die. They said a sniper left one night before dawn, took nothing but her rifle, her notebook, and a bag of sand from the eastern ridge. Some said she transferred to a training post up north. Others said she disappeared into the mountains. Thorne never confirmed either version. He just kept her name off the casualty lists. One evening, months later, he found a package waiting at his office. No return address. Inside, a single bullet casing polished clean, and a folded note written in Vance's handwriting. "Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts." He sat there for a long time, staring at the words. Outside, the wind began to rise again, moving through the empty base like a memory refusing to fade. He looked up toward the horizon, where the sun was setting over the desert, bleeding orange into blue. Somewhere out there, a rifle would be resting on a rock, its scope catching the same light. And maybe, just maybe, a woman would be breathing slow, eyes steady, waiting for the world to quiet enough for one perfect shot. Not at a target, not at an enemy, but at peace itself. Because sometimes redemption isn't about forgiveness. It's about finally lowering the rifle and realizing you don't have to aim anymore.